in on more of the questions created by that appointment of the new war czar. We'll turn now to former Pentagon spokesman P.J. Crowley, now a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. P.J., thanks for some of your time tonight.
Hi, Keith.
Since it could be argued that constitutionally there's already a war czar in the form of either the Commander-in-Chief or the Secretary of Defense, or if you prefer, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, do you have an explanation for why the White House felt it needed a war czar 4 years into a conflict since Tony Snow did not have one?
Yeah, actually, I could add the Commander of Central Command and several others to your list. I mean, it's tried and true in Washington that when you're either confronting a insoluble problem or you're not willing to admit that your strategy is failing, you create a czar. We created a czar in the drug war. We still have it, obviously. We have a czar who's working down in New Orleans and doing a brilliant job of reconstructing the Gulf Coast. So, I thought about this, and you and I are both baseball fans. You know, your team is losing. You're unwilling to confront the star players, perhaps, and so you create a second base coach. And there'll be a lot of motion and activity, but it's hard to see how the game will be played any differently.
There was a reference on a blog, and not to take these things too seriously, but Intel Dump has a quote from an Iraq veteran, national security analyst Philip Carter, who asks, how broken is the U.S. national security apparatus that we need a czar to run it? Does it need a three-star with some juice in the Pentagon to make things work? Is it pointing at something systemic about our military that this would even be considered?
Well, I think there is a very legitimate question that Philip Carter and others have raised. We have a Cold War national security apparatus stemming from the National Security Act of 1947 that created, among other things, my former employer, the United States Air Force. We have the situation where we have the Department of Defense to fight wars. We have the Department of State, to manage the peace. We now find ourselves in the middle with a long war or peace building, whatever you want to call it, and we are not really organized effectively. We don't have a coordinated ability to do this well. So I do think that there is this larger question of adapting our national security apparatus to the 21st century, but adding one more box to the organizational block, in my mind, is not the answer.
Do we know what the guy in this organizational box is going to be doing, what kind of power he has, responsibility or role will be? Has that become clear to you?
Well, I think Richard put his face on some aspect of it, which is to explain it better if it can be. Although really, you have a strategy that is not working. You have lost control of the situation on the ground. You've lost control of the picture, which influences public opinion both here in the United States and also in Iraq. You have a three-star general. I'm very skeptical of ad hoc arrangements. The best example is the CPA, the Coalition Provisional Authority, which turned out to be an institutional disaster. It was driven by ideology, and it did not have institutional support. So, and you also have these people in the chain of command, from the Secretary of Defense to the Secretary of State, who have day jobs, and it really is supposedly their function, to do the president's bidding and to pay attention to his priorities. And it's hard for me to see what Steve Hadley, Bob Gates, Condi Rice, what is more important than focusing on this. So why do we need, one more advisor? What the president really needs is better advice.
And of all the ad hoc arrangements, this is one that requires confirmation by the Senate. How did that happen, and is that likely to be the case for General Lute?
Well, unlike every other assistant to the president, this one will require congressional approval, Senate approval, because he is a three-star general. All three-star generals, four-star generals have their new jobs approved by the Senate. Ironically, this will be the only time as an assistant to the president, that General Lute will come before the Congress, because, Steve Hadley, by tradition, consults with the Congress, but he cannot be called to testify. This is one of the reasons why Tom Ridge ultimately moved from being an advisor to the president to the Secretary of Homeland Security, in part so Congress could have access to him.
The second base coach, P.J. Crowley, former Pentagon spokesman, a long line of baseball folks, now senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Thank you, P.J.
A pleasure, Keith.
Prince Harry will not be going to Iraq